oil there. We don't see that kind of map in the media. Will Darfur be the next Rwanda? Are you going to let Darfur be the next Rwanda? Wow, I could spend an hour and a half or 2 or 3 just talking about that one sentence. All of the information and the themes and subliminal, undiscussed, unspoken force behind that statement. Will you let Darfur be the next Rwanda? There's that image of the suffering child. No background, no history, no facts. Stop genocide in Darfur. Because the last thing we want is 800,000 innocent Darfur people slaughtered with machetes like they did in Rwanda. And here's Philip Gurevich in the New Yorker, which is one of the premier venues for State Department propaganda on the subject of Rwanda, for example. Definitely Congo. And Philip Gurevich wrote the book, "We wish to inform you that tomorrow our families will be killed," which always makes me just about gag. Partly out of jealousy and partly out of the fact that it's just pure propaganda. The guy's a good writer, and that's how he does this. But he's also a State Department hack. He's very closely connected to the State Department, and he went into Rwanda after 1994 with the support of the State Department, with the support of the government in power, and started producing propaganda, which completely sold the story that we were supposed to believe, and most people have bought about Rwanda. And I'm going to unpack that story as we get going. But anyway, this was 2009, May 4th. And New Yorker is still continuing to sell this nonsense, even though it's becoming more and more clear that they can't do so, because the truth is slowly coming out. So the last image about the showing the propaganda angle is this one. What do you get out of this picture? Anybody got a suggestion? Cover of Time, James Natchway. Anybody familiar with the film War Photographer? War Photographer paints James Natchway as you know, a heroic white guy who's photographed all these wars, and he's a really quiet guy, and you know, he's seen all this trauma, and it's very white supremacist. James Natchway is portrayed as a man who just, or lives life as a guy who just goes, takes a bunch of pictures, and you know, shows the world what happened. It's another undefined photograph of the Congo. There's no mineral companies in there. There's no white individuals, as you find in Congo. There's no history. There's no current history, no past history. It's just unfathomable black suffering, no definition, no details. And that's what the story becomes inside. You set the stage on the cover, and you've got the perfect story. So let's get into the details. Oh, I guess I do have one more. Back in King Leopold's era, of course, a guy named Joseph Conrad wrote a book called Heart of Darkness, which was used for many years as a text about exposing the atrocities of the Leopold era. And that theme, that language, Heart of Darkness, is all over the place. It's repeated also in the words from the book, the horror. And that you saw in the Marlon Brando film Apocalypse Now, where Marlon Brando turns into one of those zombies, and they're butchering people with machetes. I mean, this is propaganda useful to the system, selling the idea that people over there are like that, and we are not like that. Even though Marlon Brando becomes one of them. The horror. This propaganda language, this language is used all over the place. And the images. So Leopold took Congo by force through Henry Morton Stanley back in 1885. And this is the Congo River. This is his bronze statue in Kinshasa, which was toppled by the people at some point and moved up into some little obscure, soon-to-be museum area. And Leopold achieved his goal by convincing the world that he was humanitarian. He was going to stop slavery in the Congo. The Arabs were committing slavery, and Leopold was going to stop it. The United States, Belgium, at the time, France, England, they all had connections to Leopold. There were people making a lot of money on the subject of rubber and ivory in the Congo. So the biggest first products to be involved in the plunder of the Congo were ivory and rubber. Rubber plantations, palm oil plantations soon came along. This photograph is 2007 in eastern Congo. One of the plantations, in northeastern Congo, one of the plantations that was established just about the time that Henry Morton Stanley went into the Congo in 1880, 1885, 1890, 1895, around those time frames. And the way they got all the rubber out to make King Leopold in Belgium rich was, of course, to establish quota systems with the Force Publique, the first Congolese soldiers who were brutalized into becoming soldiers or given some position of power with a gun. And then they cut off the people's hands if they didn't produce enough rubber, if they didn't get enough ivory. And this is the beginning. 10 million people from 1895 to 1908 when King Leopold was taken out of power. partly because of the book by Joseph Conrad, but mostly because of a bunch of black African Americans, for the most part, missionaries who exposed the true story. The very first true human rights reporters in the world were black African American missionaries who went into the Congo. And I can't even remember the guy's name right now, but he's absolutely one of the most fantastic exposers of human rights atrocities in the world. And he set the framework for what would come along later under, for example, Amnesty International. So here's the Congo River where Leopold and Stanley, far upstream near Kisangani, which is a city we'll mention a few times tonight. And here's one of those first plantations, the Busira Lomami plantation. And this is 2007. The plantation has been, since colonialism ended, 1960, June 30th, 1960, in Congo, the country was, at the time, in 1960, it was more wealthy than South Africa and Portugal. So Congo was more wealthy than South Africa and Portugal. And you see the kind of infrastructure that existed, the kind of boats. There were ferries and these old rivercraft this is a place called Bendaka on the Congo River as well. But the plantations that were established and the money that was coming out of Congo by 1960 after those first 50 years or 60 years of colonialism was phenomenal. And then the white system said, you want independence? Fine, here. And then they set about to break the legs and break the backs of the people and take whatever they could by different means, calling it independence. And one of the ways they've done that is to assassinate anybody who turned out to be a true leader, beginning with, for example, Patrice Lumumba. So you get a sense of the kind of money that existed in the Congo under the colonial era, because that plantation, that warehouse, is just one of thousands and thousands like that. The church was very powerful from the very beginning. The missionaries went in, as I said, but they also went in working for Leopold and selling his story, which was that there's the end of slavery is coming to the Congo. And during the war in the Congo, many of the churches were untouched. And this gives you a sense of the power of Christianity in the Congo. The Christian church, the Protestant church, the Catholic church in Congo, these big Catholic missions, absolutely untouched by the war in many cases. Not the same story in Rwanda, but we'll get to that. And on the plantations today in the heart of the Congo, these people work like absolute slaves. This is this guy's only clothing. He doesn't have anything at home that he's going to put on later. He works all day, every day, carrying these palm nuts that on the end of them have a spike about this long that's strong enough to penetrate your skull if it landed on your head. And he's carrying it on his head there. People fall from these trees. It's absolute slavery. It's run by an American guy named Elwin Blattner. The plantations of Elwin Blattner in the Congo, who began operating in the Congo in the 1980s. This is what's whited out from the Congo, what you don't see in the American media about the Congo. If you do, it's always those Africans. It's always those Africans have done this, or there's child slavery over here, or maybe a Congolese missionary has been killed, but if he has, it's usually a white guy that they're going to talk about. And as Noam Chomsky would say, this is not monolithic. It's not always true. There are always exceptions to the rule that you can find. But the bottom line, the majority of the reporting is it covers up the nature of exploitation, which you see in the background, the infrastructure, the massive cranes that were set up on the coast, on the shore of the Congo River at Kisangani, which is deep in the heart of the Congo, while the people get nothing out of it and are still living the way they were 150 years ago, for the most part, which means no basic education, no basic health care, no access to those. Nothing to do for, in many cases, for earning an income, and subject to the forces of the greater power structure that exists, which I'll get into more. But here's the juxtaposition of the average person trying to get across the river versus the big infrastructure that was established. And it's the same thing for these plantations. These guys, again, he doesn't wear this shirt because he's going to work and he doesn't want to ruin his best clothing. He's wearing his best clothing. He's wearing his only clothing. He works every day, every day, every day. If he dies, if he gets sick, if he can't come to work a certain number of days, he will be punished. His family will be forced out of the plantation housing if they were given plantation housing to begin with. The mining established in Congo in the 1920s, some of these big mines were evacuated because they were finished by 1960, considered finished. Today they're going back to these same mines and rehabilitating them because they're realizing they left behind all these tailings. They left behind all these ores, and they've got this sophisticated technology now that can find the minerals and where they are. But by 1920, the raw materials coming out of the Congo for Belgium and the rest of the world were very significant. Big mining, diamonds, cobalt, copper, uranium for nuclear weapons, nuclear reactors. Copper and cobalt are essential for many of the big technological and industrial processes that go on in the world. Uranium, 1938, came out of Shinkolobwe in the Congo and was used for the bombs that were dropped on Nagasaki and Hiroshima. So Congo is central to the world. It's not some far-off place. It's not some middle of nowhere. It's central to the world economy, and it always has been, at least since the rise of the post-industrial revolution era, like 1900 onwards. Here you see in the capital city in Kinshasa, in the foreground is one of these Catholic missions, which is kept with its beautiful gardens and its big walls to keep people out. And the tallest building in the middle is the building built for the mining sector. The Gécamines was the state parastatal mining company established by Belgium with the support of big American financiers who ran the mining show after 1960. So this is post-1960 we're talking about now. Mobutu took power, as I said. First they assassinated Patrice Lumumba, then Mobutu took power. He was a CIA agent. He ran the show from effectively 1963 or 1962 until 1997 when he was thrown out by American power. This is one of his palaces in Lisala after it was taken over and destroyed by the Rwandans who marched through the Congo in 1997. Mobutu is significant because he set the stage for the exploitation from Congo for that vast period of time. It was always blamed on Mobutu as if there was nobody behind him. There's no white guys operating behind Mobutu. Have you ever seen one? Can you name a single white guy that operated behind Mobutu? Congolese people and Rwandans don't say anything. Who? Jacques Chirac is a fair enough answer, yes. Anyway, there are other people, and they lived in Congo, and they live in Congo today, and they operate from Belgium. They go back and forth. They have multiple passports. George Forrest, one of the most powerful, the Forrest family, the most powerful families in the Congo. Maurice Templespan. Anybody know Maurice Templespan? He's big in New York. Templespan family operates out of New York. They operate in diamonds. Maurice Templespan was the